Adventures in Music is on the road again, and on this occasion we're visiting the Van Wezel Performing Arts Hall in Sarasota, Florida. Overlooking the Gulf of Mexico, this landmark building, designed by the architect Frank Lloyd Wright, is the only purple seashell-shaped hall in the world. Owned and operated by the city of Sarasota, it opened its doors in 1968, and since that time it has been presenting a broad spectrum of the world's finest performing artists for 40 years. Today is no exception, and this evening's concert will feature one of the greatest musicians of this generation. Often known affectionately, and with good reason, as the man with the golden flute, Sir James Galway is also one of the most recorded artists of our time. With his amazing ability to give flawless performances of both the virtuoso flute repertoire and the popular classics, he has now sold well over 30 million records during his extraordinary career. I have had the good fortune to have known Sir James Galway for many years, and I'm so proud of his many successes and achievements. I'm also delighted to have the opportunity to talk with him today about his life and his devotion on an instrument that he so clearly loves, the flute. Sir James, you were born, I think, in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, I grew up there too.
And you played from an early age, I think, did you not?
Well, I started playing when I was around about 9, and I learned from my Uncle Joe, who learned the flute from my grandfather, and my dad played the flute. Everybody in the street practically played the flute, and of course we were all part of that huge flute band movement that takes place in Northern Ireland.
Right. Do they still have flute bands today?
Oh, sure, but they're not the same.
Really?
No, because they sold all their instruments and they got instruments like this in silver.
Uh-huh.
And you know, they had piccolos, then they had B-flat flutes, which were a little bit bigger than piccolos. Then they had flutes in F and E-flat for the middle section of the band, and then they had bass flutes.
Right.
But when you heard a band in the street, you could hear all these voices, because the little flutes carried it right up there.
Uh-huh.
But now with concert flutes, it all sounds the same because they're all in the same register, so to speak.
Well, that's interesting. Now, you started on a little was it a 5-key little flute that somebody gave you? Your uncle maybe gave you?
Yeah, no, somebody in the street gave me one.
Oh, that's right. It was a neighbour who gave it to you.
Yeah.
And then your uncle eventually gave you a flute which belonged to the flute band,
That's
presumably.
right, and I learned on that.
Right, and he gave you some lessons, I think, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
When did you realise, Jim, that you wanted to go into the profession?
Well, I didn't. I just wandered into it, and here I am. I mean, I never had a wish to be a professional musician. It's something I just did, and I just went along with the band, so to speak.
Right, and then you met Muriel Dawn.
Yes.
And that presumably was really an important moment in your life, in your flute playing life.
I mean, Muriel, she had already learned the flute from 2 people. One from your father, who embraced the French school of flute playing, and one from Robert Murgy, who embraced the English school.
Right.
So she could choose what she thought was the best, and she decided to go for the French school. And I'm very happy about that, because I consider myself to be French trained.
Right, yes. Well, of course, my father was really obviously very keen on the French school too.
Oh, sure.
I didn't realise until I was researching a little bit about your life, even though I've known you quite well for many years, I didn't realise you went to Crunel in Paris. I always thought you went to Rampal.
No, he didn't teach.
Ah,
I mean,
okay.
Having a lesson with Jean-Pierre consisted of white wine and oysters and beer and stuff like that, and maybe a chat about the flute. But the first time I played the flute for him, he said, "You know, Jimmy, you should get yourself a job in an orchestra." That's all he said.
Really? He was sort of wrong about that, wasn't he? Well, he was right, but
Well,
he was
6
also,
months later,
you know,
I did.
Yes. Well, now I was going to ask about you. You played in London. You played in the London orchestras because
Yes.
you actually sat next to a mutual friend of ours, William Bennett.
Yes,
Did
I
you
did.
not? Was that at Sadler's Wells?
That was Sadler's Wells. He was a solo flute player, but then part the way into the season, William decided to go and pick elderberries and stuff like that to make
Really?
wine.
Oh.
And he took a couple of days off to do that, so they told him not to come back.
Oh, really?
And
And you got the job,
I got the
presumably.
job,
Yes.
yeah.
It's funny because you were saying you were earning £21 a week at the time.
Yeah.
And I was playing the festival ballet and I was earning 19, but so they were paying you more than they were paying me for
yeah,
playing
well, you
the
see,
violin.
there you are. Solo flute player's worth £2 more.
Obviously, yes, obviously. So you played, of course, with all the great London orchestras. I mean, or most of them. The London Symphony Orchestra you were in for a short
Yes,
time,
and the
I
Royal
think.
Philharmonic.
Right. And then there was the moment when you decided to go for the Berlin audition.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to tell me about that audition, please.
Well, it was an interesting experience because I went along there and arrived at the Deutsches Museum in Munich where it was held at 12 o'clock. And when I got there, I met Wolfgang Stresemann, who said to me, you don't need to play because the standard is so high.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I was not ready for this.
No.
And he asked me why I was late, very aggressive. I said, well, I'm not late actually. I'm on time according to your invitation, which is noon, and it's 10 past noon. And he said, but we changed it to 9:30. I said, well, maybe you did, but nobody told me.
Boy.
And he said, well, we sent you a telegram. I said, well, maybe if you were reading the newspapers, you'd realize that the British Post Office has been on strike for a week and nobody gets anything.
Right.
I said to him, well, you know, if you had any manners at all, you would hear me play. Mm-hmm. He said, but it's not necessary and we will pay your fare. I said, I know that because that's in the agreement which you signed. I was really angry, I can tell you.
Well,
So
I'm
then
sure,
he
yes.
went away and came back and he said, the maestro will hear you. So I walked into the stage, asked the piano player if he would like to play the Eber Flute Concerto, and he declined. He said he would prefer to play a Mozart concerto, so I said, which one? D major, so we went with the D major. And after that, a voice from the 120 people listening said, okay, play L'Apres Midi, or play this, play that, and play William Tell, play Heldenhaven. So I played all these things and nobody gave me any music.
So you
But
played them all from
fortunately,
memory, right?
I knew all these pieces because, you know, the training that your dad gave us, we all learned them. And then they said, okay, wait outside. So we were outside. And they said, okay, we'd like to hear you again. This time there were 5 of us on the front of the stage, and they said one after the other. Brahms 1, Mendelssohn, William Tell, from left to right, from right to left. And after we'd done this for a bit, they told us to wait outside. Then Stresemann came and said, well, congratulations, you're now the solo flutist of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. When can you start? I said, well, I'm not going to start, and I don't feel like starting because since I got here, nobody said, welcome, how are you, please, or thank you. These are sort of essential qualities that I look for in everyday life, you know. And he said, well, if you win an audition in Germany, you are bound by law to take the job. I said, well,
Really?
who's German around here? And I just left.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, I don't think I had any idea what I was doing. And he was definitely not ready for this one. I mean, he had to go back in to tell the orchestra that I wasn't going to take the job. Can you imagine it?
Yeah, I can't imagine it.
No. Anyway, he wrote a letter to me sometime later, but it reached England about a week later after this horrendous postal strike. You know what that's like.
Right.
And I read the letter in which it said that 90% of the orchestra voted for me and they would like me to play. So I wrote and told them, well, look, I have a very good job and our orchestra is the Royal Philharmonic and it's conducted by Rudolf Kempe, which is a very good German conductor. And I have a good time here. I bought a house and I'm quite happy. And I don't see why I should go to Germany for a year to play in your orchestra to be told at the end of the year that I don't get the job. But I said, I will do one thing. I will come and play for a month with the orchestra, and if I think it's any good, I'll stay there. I'll take the job. So, of course, they agreed to this, and I went and played for a month, and it was unbelievable. It was fantastic.
Really?
It was really, truly the best orchestra I've ever sat in or listened to.
So you decided to stay really for that
yeah.
reason.
Yeah.
And how old were you, Jim, then?
I think I was 31, maybe 29, something like that.
And you enjoyed your whole time there? Or did it pale a little bit towards the end? Why did you decide to take off as a soloist some years later?
First of all, to answer the first part of your question, I learned a tremendous amount in the orchestra, playing with Carry-On. And you see, one of the differences between the Berlin Philharmonic and a British orchestra is that they actually rehearse.
I was just
a British
gonna say the
orchestra
same
reads
thing.
through something and then
Right.
plays it.
Yes.
This is
yes,
different.
Yes.
And the more experienced the orchestra is at certain things, they will do it better on one rehearsal. You see, but if you're expecting them to play George Enescu Symphony No. 1 on one rehearsal, it's going to be a bit iffy. Whereas the Berlin Philharmonic would rehearse it maybe with 3 or 4 rehearsals and then play it. And it's a Berlin Philharmonic playing too,
Right.
where every member of the orchestra is very experienced players. And it was just such a big step into another world for me.
So it was a good experience.
Oh, it was lovely.
Yes.
And
yes.
it was great with Carry-On because he was such a good rehearser.
Right.
He rehearsed all the most difficult bits. You know, when people say to me, oh, you know, such and such a conductor, he made the Vienna Philharmonic play this 25 times. Well, Carry-On made the orchestra play it for 5 minutes. Never mind counting the number of times. This is the beginning of Beethoven 5.
Oh, yes.
And it got to a point that when we played it, it was real loud and real good and very well together. And he could do it just like that. It would go da-da-da-da.
Right. Yes. No, that's very interesting. But how did the solo career take off from there? What happened?
Well,
You got a manager, did you not?
yes, I did.
Yes.
But let me explain a little bit of what happened before.
Okay.
While I was in London, it was possible to rent the Queen Elizabeth Hall, and it was advertised along with the Royal Festival Hall send-outs, mailing list. And 3 of us did this, myself, Colin Tilney, and what's the name of the gamba player? Adam Skeeping. The 3 of us rented this thing along with Michael Jeans, who was like the manager.
I know Michael Jeans, yes.
And we split the money between us, and we made a real good killing on that sort of thing. And we did very fancy programs, like, for example, we do just Couperin and Bach. 1 Bach sonata, 1 Couperin piece, interval, 1 Couperin, 1 Bach. And then we would do all the Bach sonatas or Handel sonatas and Couperin, things like this. We'd mix it up. And each time we did this, it was packed. It was always sold out. And I began to get a sort of reputation. And gradually I came quite often to England to play with the orchestras, with the Welsh Orchestra, for example, Scottish Orchestra. And it was all very nice. And then I decided to leave. So at that time I was managed by Michael Emerson. And he did a pretty good job. I mean, he had me working all hours of the day and night, probably for next to nothing at the beginning, because that's what you do. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to leave the Berlin Philharmonic, because I could not, in my free time, do the solos, solo concerts, and then play the orchestra, because it was just non-stop playing all the time. You didn't have a day off. So then it rolled along to the next season, and on the first day of the next season I told Carry-On I was going to leave.
What did he say, Jim?
Well, he said, you know, when I told him why I wanted to leave, He said, well, if you don't do it, you'll never know if you could succeed. And he was quite right. There's nothing like doing it to find if you can.
Right. And that was really very generous of him, actually, to say that to you.
Well, it was, but he had another agenda. You know, he was
did
busy
he?
telling the other guys, look, be nice to Jimmy, try to get him to stay.
Oh, really?
And then as it rolled along to my birthday, which was in December, I sent them my official resignation. And then things hotted up because Carry-On realised I was going to do
really
it.
were going,
So he
yeah.
began to get peeved, and I began to get a bit more ballsy because I wasn't taking this anymore.
Right. Well, let's just change the subject just a tiny little bit, because I do see you have one of your famous golden flutes with you.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you why you chose gold over silver. Is it because it has a softer sound, or is it just because it looks more beautiful? Or what reason was there for you changing to gold,
Well,
only gold flutes?
I feel personally that gold is a better metal for flutes. And so do many flute builders and head joint makers. They all think making a gold head, it sounds better. I mean, I have 12 of them, so I'm in a position to say that it does sound better than a silver flute.
Yes.
Because I have several silver flutes as well,
Right.
you know. But I've always had a different approach to flutes and buying them. For example, when I was in Sadler's Wells, I bought my first Cooper flute and it cost £129. And when I walked in the pit with this thing, everybody said, gee, Jimmy, how can you afford that? I said, well, it's very simple. I go to work on the bus.
Uh-huh.
I don't have a car. And these jokers would be playing on a piece of scrap metal, and they'd have a nice car outside which they were paying a fortune for the pleasure of owning.
Uh-huh. Yes. Yes.
You know, so it was another way of thinking. And I've retained this way of thinking still.
Uh-huh. And was that your first open hole flute?
Yes,
The
it was,
Cooper?
because
It was.
before I had a Haynes closed hole offset
That's
G,
right, yes.
low C.
Uh-huh.
And then suddenly I got a open hole, low B, and everything like that. And I could play it perfectly because your dad taught me how to hold the flute, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah, well, that was
Really?
part of his teaching, how to hold the flute.
Uh-huh. Very important how to hold the
It's
flute, because
extremely important.
if you hold it wrong, it's a bit like the violin. You know, if you don't get it right as far as holding it is concerned, nothing works.
And you get terrible pains in
and
your
things,
hands.
yes,
And you
yes.
actually cannot play the low notes of the flute the way you should.
Right.
I met him in Belfast when I was a kid.
I remember that, yes.
And
Yes.
he fixed up for me to go to the Guildhall.
Mm-hmm.
Without any examination, they just accepted me on his word.
Right.
But the big problem that I had was I was 15 at the time. And a 15-year-old let loose in London, you never know what might happen.
Especially if it was you.
Yeah, especially me. I mean,
Right.
you can say that again. Me at 15, I can't believe it.
No, I can't
I mean,
either.
my mum must have been having a heart attack.
Right.
And then came John Francis. So John said, look, if you send this boy to the Royal College of Music, we can look after him in our home. So he did. And for 3 years, I went to the Royal College of Music, and every day I thought, I've got to figure out a way to learn with Jeffrey Gilbert.
Oh, really?
And I did. I just left the college and went to the Guildhall.
Uh-huh. But-
Nobody'd ever done that before.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Jim, do you still practice as much as you
Yeah.
ever did? You would have to, because you're concertizing the whole time, I imagine.
Yes.
Do you take any time off to practice, like the summers?
No, I just do what I can do during the day. During
right.
any given day, I practice what I can.
Right. And then do you have periods at home when you can enjoy your beautiful house?
Oh, sure. Sure.
So you have periods when you do not tour, but you have a little bit of respite,
Yes.
hopefully. When is
Yes.
that? Is that during the summer, or?
Well, it's different times. Usually during January. Mm-hmm. Is
Okay.
it? Because we like to stay Christmas and the New Year at home.
Right, of
And
course.
then we try to stay in July, but it's always a dead loss because somebody always comes up with some good idea. You know,
Which you can't resist,
That you
of
can't
course.
resist,
Right.
yeah. I mean, it has to be a good idea. You know, for example, I'm getting inducted into the Hall of Fame at the Hollywood Bowl. I think this
I
coming
didn't
July.
know that. Are you really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
and
wonderful.
things like this you can't refuse.
No,
I mean,
you can't
you
refuse
have to
those.
do that.
Right, absolutely.
No
yes.
matter what you planned.
Right, right. Well, you've played for some amazing people. I was reading the list: Prince Charles and the Empress of Japan and the Pope, and lots of other people. Can you think of a special occasion that really stands out in your mind? Is there anything special?
I think one of the funniest and more amusing episodes of my life was at Buckingham Palace when the Queen hosted the G7, and it was Mozart's anniversary of his death, 1992, and the horse guard, they're the mounted ones, right?
Yes, yes, they are.
Yeah,
Yes, I
they
think so.
came
Yes, Horse Guard.
in and did this very elaborate thing on horseback, and they played the minuet from The Marriage of Figaro, which was beautiful. And then I'd already rehearsed with the band of the Irish Guards. I mean, there was bandsmen as far as the eye could see, and this was all in Chelsea Barracks. And we had to practice marching because we had to march in with these guys. And the sergeant major, who everybody called by his first name, very, very easygoing army, and he said to me, Mr. Galway, I would advise you not to stop walking, or don't stop, and if you fall down, try to get up immediately, because this is a marching machine, they'll march right over you.
Oh.
I thought, okay. So we were going to play a couple of pieces. I forget what they are now, but one I'll always remember because it was from the Fiddler on the Roof. Once I Was a Rich Man.
Oh, yes, yes.
And the guys in Neller Hall, they print their own music. So they'd printed the title, Now I Am a Rich Man, for me. And then when we got to the point, I marched in with the band in darkness while they were doing something else, like a light show. They had a fantastic light show there, a laser show. And while they were doing that, we got in position. And then I remember I was playing Danny Boy. And I said, can we do a Ritterdando here? And the bandmaster said, no, we can't, James, because by the time the guys at the back, which a quarter of a kilometre away, he said, by the time they get to the Rallentando, we're already halfway through the piece. So no Ritterdandos. So that was a straightforward reading of Danny Boy.
Marching tempo, yes, yes. Oh, that's funny.
And then I had to go and meet the Queen. And I had my own personal butler there, and who was dressed with all his army regalia. And we were supposed to go on a door at the side, and we had to pass the press, and they all knew me. And they're all yelling, Jimmy, say hello to a Queen for me. Oscar Foster, if I can borrow £5. You know, all this sort of ribbing that goes on with these guys. It was very funny. We got to the door and it was locked, and I had to walk back past them all and get the same treatment again. And eventually we got inside the palace, and the Queen was trying to receive me first, but I didn't make it, so she'd already gone through half the guests. So I met her in the middle of all these dignitaries.
It's sort of exciting to meet the Queen, isn't it?
It is,
though?
yeah, it is.
So,
it is.
And you obviously went through the knighthood thing. I was telling somebody today that she actually does come and sort of dub you with the sword on both shoulders. Did you have to get down on one knee?
And she knows you. Yes, you do kneel on one knee, but they provide a thing for you to kneel on. So that, you know, because some of the people my age can't get back up if they're on the ground. And I thought she was very cute because she puts on this the insignia, and she straightened it up, you know, just like my mom.
Oh, really?
Going out to school for the first time.
Right.
Straighten up your tie. She was very nice, and she did remember me. Well, she always remembers me. The last time she had a reception there for people over 65 who are still out doing the rounds, you know,
right.
who still have to work, you know.
Right.
And she was telling everybody, we were standing around in a group, and she said to everybody, you know, the first time I met this fellow, he was in a wheelchair, and I thought, poor fellow. And then the next thing I see him standing up, and I said, yes, Mum, I only did that to attract the attention of the ladies. And she thought this was a huge joke. She has a good sense of humour.
Yes, yes. Well, she'd need it, wouldn't she, really, to get through life, I would
Oh
think.
yeah,
Yes.
sure. But you know, in Japan is very interesting because there, I played a few times with the Empress of Japan, who plays a piano. Last time we were there, she invited us to her birthday party, but we couldn't go because I had to go and move on and do another job somewhere.
Really?
Yeah, unfortunately. But she really likes Jeannie, the two of them.
Oh. Well, you have a very interesting life, don't you? I'm going to ask you one more question because you have to go and rehearse in a second. I know that. Jim, what do you do for fun? What do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, I like to watch movies and I like to help Jeannie with the cooking. I like to swim. Now we got a swimming pool.
You've got a pool now?
Yeah.
Yes, you didn't have a pool when I was there, I don't think.
No, we were thinking, we were always thinking of getting one, and it took this long to get it.
But it's a wonderful thing. It's heated,
Oh, it's
presumably.
great, yeah,
so
sure.
can you swim sort of in the winter as well?
No, but we're working on that.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
And you've built on quite a lot of the house and things. So
Yes, that's right.
That's a sort of a hobby in a way, is it not?
Well, it is. Not one I would recommend.
Oh, really?
No.
Well, I hope one day I'll be able to come and see you there again because
Do.
it's such a beautiful setting. I had a wonderful time the last time. And I'd like to thank you very, very much for giving your time this afternoon when I know you have a performance to follow and a rehearsal. And
Sure.
I know that my audience will be thrilled that I've had the opportunity to talk to you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.